Here's something that should stop you in your tracks. When researchers ask people trait by trait whether they'd like to change some part of who they are, more than 80% say yes. In some studies it's as high as 97%, and around 60% are actively trying to change something about themselves right now. Think about that for a second. The overwhelming majority of us are quietly dissatisfied with some aspect of our own character. We may want to be more disciplined, calmer under pressure, bolder in the room, and yet most of us have no real idea what we're actually working with. Think about it. You've spent most of your life inside one particular personality. You've never read its manual. You don't know which settings are turned up, which are turned down, or why the same situation that fires up the man next to you leaves you cold. Why does he thrive on chaos that drains you, or stays calm when you come apart? I'm Dr. Nick Kecker. I'm an organisational psychologist, and over the next 6 episodes, I'm going to hand you that manual. The single most rigorously tested map of human personality that science has ever produced. No horoscopes, no quizzes, no 4-letter types you share with a quarter of the planet. Just the evidence and what it actually means for your career, your health, your relationships, and your financial success. Let me be clear about why you should care, because this isn't a personality quiz to share at a dinner party. Your personality isn't just background colour, it's a set of engines underpinning everything you do. Across decades of research, the same 5 broad traits predict, probabilistically, never with certainty, how far you'll go at work, how much you learn, how long your relationships last, how you handle stress, and even, on average, how long you'll live. They predict who emerges as a leader and who gets quietly passed over, who burns out and who endures, who holds a team together and who corrodes it from the inside. The key word here is probabilistically. None of this is destiny, it's a tendency, a predisposition, the way the odds lean for people built like you. But here's the problem. If you don't understand the tendencies you're running on, you'll keep mistaking them for fixed facts about the world. The man who dodges every difficult conversation tells himself he's just keeping the peace. The one who can't switch off tells himself the job is the problem. The one who flies off the handle tells himself that other people are idiots. Often it isn't the piece or the job or the idiots. It's the operating system, running silently, shaping the same outcomes again and again. And here's the part that matters most. The reason this series exists at all. Once you can see it, you can finally start to work with it instead of against it. So where did this map come from? Not from a clever theory dreamt up by someone chilling in an armchair. That's worth saying because most personality systems you may have come across are exactly that. Someone's neat idea sold well. This one's different. It originated from language. The idea, first floated over a century ago and called the lexical hypothesis, is beautifully simple. The things that matter most about people get baked in, over thousands of years, into the words we use to describe each other. Reliable, anxious, warm, blunt, curious, lazy, bold. Every language on earth has hundreds of these words, because the ability to understand and describe each other accurately is a critical survival skill. So researchers gathered thousands of these descriptors and asked the basic mathematical question, which ones go together? And when you run that analysis again and again across decades, in language after language and culture after culture, the same broad clusters keep dropping out of the data. Not 3, not 16, 5. 5 recurring dimensions that reliably capture how human beings differ from one another. That's not an opinion and it's not a fad. It's one of the most replicated findings in the entire history of psychology. When something shows up that consistently across so many diverse populations, you stop arguing against it and start using it. Those 5 traits are easily remembered by the acronym OCEAN, Ocean. 5 unique traits that collectively represent your unique personality. Let me introduce you to yours. O is for openness. Openness represents how curious, imaginative and drawn to the new you are versus how practical, grounded and happy with the proven. The visionary versus the safe pair of hands. C is for conscientiousness. Conscientiousness represents how organised, disciplined and dependable you are versus how spontaneous and easygoing. This is the trait of follow-through, and it's so important we're giving it the whole of the next episode. E is for extroversion. Extroversion represents how much you're energised by people, action and reward, versus how much you recharge in quieter, smaller settings. It's not loud versus shy, it's wired for stimulation versus wired for calm. A is for agreeableness. Agreeableness represents how warm, cooperative and trusting you are versus how tough-minded, sceptical and competitive. The team player versus the hard negotiator. And finally, N is for neuroticism, sometimes flipped around and called emotional stability. Neuroticism represents how strongly you feel threat, worry and negative emotion versus how calm and even you stay when the pressure piles on. 5 dials sounds simple, and that's the problem, because if I left it there you'd walk away misunderstanding the situation. So hold that thought for a moment, because I'm now going to complicate things a little, and it's that complication that differentiates this personality model from all the others and turns it into a genuinely useful development tool. Here's the first complication, and it's the one almost everyone gets wrong. These traits are not types stuffed into boxes. You're not an extrovert or an introvert in the same way you're blood type O or AB. In other words, these traits are not categorical. You can think about each trait being a dial. It's a continuum, and where people sit on that continuum follows a statistical distribution curve or bell curve. A few people are way out at the extremes, the textbook cases, but most of us cluster around the middle, leaning a little one way or the other, perhaps shifting slightly depending on the situation. This is exactly why those 4-letter personality types used by other popular personality models seem so satisfying, and they mislead everybody so badly. They take a smooth, in-between reality and chop it into tiny little tribes, because these tribes are easier to explain, easier to sell, and easier to put on a social media bio. Unfortunately, the reality is far messier and far more interesting. You're a unique pattern of settings across these 5 dials because each one has 6 underlying subtraits or facets. That's what makes you unique. Here's the second complication, and this is the one that differentiates people who actually understands this stuff from those who don't. The 5 traits are not at the bottom of the map, they're the top. Underneath each broad trait sits narrower, more precise subtraits called facets. 6 facets per trait, 30 in total. And the facets are where the real action is, because the broad label hides the detail that actually matters. Let's simplify this a little with an example. Take 2 people with an identical conscientiousness score. On paper, they have the same personality profile, but one is driven, ambitious, hard-charging, and lives in total chaos, misses deadlines, has a 4,000 email inbox backlog, and a desk like a crime scene. The other is meticulous, tidy, methodical, everything's filed away, but he has no power in his belly, no drive to push beyond the comfortable. The same headline trait, 2 completely different people, suited to completely different jobs. The top level trait score hid everything that really mattered. Professionals call this the bandwidth fidelity trade-off. Broad measures predict broad outcomes, narrow measures predict narrow ones. If you only want to know whether someone will do reasonably well in life in general, the broad trait may be okay. But if you want to know whether they'll keep your accounts straight or hold their nerve in a crisis next Tuesday, you have to go down to the facet level. The point is this: when someone says they're quite conscientious, the useful question is which part. We'll go over all 30 facets properly, trait by trait, across the next 5 episodes. The single most useful idea in this entire field, the one that took personality science decades of argument to get right. A trait that never gets expressed makes no difference to anyone. Your traits are not constantly switched on. They're latent, potentials, sitting there waiting for the right situation to activate them. Psychologists draw a sharp line between strong situations and weak situations. A strong situation gives everybody loud, clear cues about exactly how to behave. A red traffic light, a courtroom, a tightly scripted sales call with a manager listening in. A strong situation, almost everyone behaves the same way, whatever their personality, because the situation simply drowns the trait out. A weak situation is the opposite: ambiguity, freedom, no one watching. An open-ended creative brief, an unstructured meeting with no agenda. A Tuesday working alone from home with a vague objective and a fridge 10 feet away. In a weak situation, there's nothing to drown the trait out, so your personality climbs into the driver's seat and takes the wheel. Sit with that because it has a very sharp edge for the modern working person. Remote and hybrid work has quietly turned much of our jobs into one week situation. Strip away the office, the supervision, the colleague at the next desk, and what's left to decide whether the work actually gets done? Your conscientiousness, your self-discipline, your emotional stability. The research is blunt about this. Personality predicts performance far more strongly in loose, high-discretion work situations than in tightly scripted, controlled work. Working from home didn't level the playing field, it tilted it steeply towards whoever's operating system was already built for it. There's a more precise version of this called trait activation theory. It says a given trait only switches on when the situation offers cues relevant to that specific trait. Social settings activate extroversion. Detail and deadlines activate conscientiousness. Novel problems activate openness. And hidden inside that is a genuine and slightly liberating leadership lesson. Situations are far easier to change than people. If you want a behaviour from yourself or from your team, you can either spend years trying to change who people are, or you can engineer the situation that switches the behaviour on. Want reliability? Build structure, checklists, deadlines, visible standards. Want innovation? Build looseness, unstructured time. Provide room to fail. Most managers blame the people or write yet another policy. The real leverage is in the design. Traits also don't act alone in isolation of one another. They combine, internally within you and within any groups you're part of. These combinations often matter more than the single scores. For example, high agreeableness can soften the edge of high neuroticism. A warm, easy temperament takes some of the sting out of an anxious one. Extroversion paired with emotional stability predicts performance in people-facing roles better than either trait on its own. The social drive plus the steady nerves. Within a team, it gets even more interesting. And here my own doctoral research turned up something that genuinely surprised me. When organisations build teams, they chase the highest average they can get. But what often matters more isn't the average level of a trait like conscientiousness, it's how much the members vary. A team where everyone is reliably diligent sets a strong unspoken norm that quietly drags the stragglers up to meet it. Mix high and low together and you get the corrosive stuff, the free rider who coasts, and when the sucker effect, where your most conscientious people notice a slack, decide they're not going to be the mug and quietly stop trying. And there's a brutal asymmetry running underneath all of it. Negative behaviour is more contagious than positive. One anxious or hostile presence spreads through a group faster than a calm one ever will. If you lead people, that's not a footnote, that's close to the whole game. Let me clarify something important. There is no best personality. There's no ideal profile you should be quietly trying to morph into. Every setting on every dial has advantages and disadvantages. High conscientiousness builds careers and protects health. However, excessive conscientiousness leads to rigidity, perfectionism, and burnout. Low agreeableness can make a formidable negotiator who never gets walked over, and a lonely man few people will trust. High openness fuels vision and creativity, and sometimes leaves behind a graveyard of half-finished projects. High extroversion gets you in the room, but it can also mean that you never sit still long enough to do any deep work. Every trait has a bright side and a dark side, and which one actually shows up depends on the strength of the trait and the situation you're facing. So, the goal of this series is not to persuade you to be someone else, it's to help you understand the trade-offs you're already living with and help you to learn how to play your particular hand better. Over the next 5 episodes, we'll walk through each trait, all of its 6 facets, and help you better understand the version that largely determines how you feel and behave in any given situation. I'd like to share 2 honest caveats before we go any further, because this field is commonly misused. First, this personality model is a map, not a specification. These tools describe tendencies across large groups of people. They do not judge any single individual. A personality questionnaire score is the start of an honest conversation with yourself, never a label to hang around your neck, and certainly not anyone else's. Second, this series is intended to be educational, not diagnostic. We'll talk about anxiety, about the dark side of these traits, about where normal personality shades into real difficulty. But if anything in this video series makes you genuinely worried about your own mental health, that's a conversation for a qualified professional, not someone talking to a camera on the internet. So, here's where we're going. Episode by episode, one dial at a time. Conscientiousness, extroversion, neuroticism, agreeableness, and openness. What each one actually is, why it shapes your work, your health, and your life, and how to spot it in yourself and in the people across the table from you. Every episode is building towards the question I opened with. 80% of us want to change something about ourselves. Most of us never do. Not because change is impossible, but because wanting to isn't enough. It takes structure, it takes a plan, and above all, it takes knowing exactly which dial to turn, by how much and how. That's a series of videos to follow this one, personality change, because the science is clear, you're not stuck. But first you have to understand the manual. Start here, watch the next 5 episodes, and by the end you'll understand the operating system you've been running blind with your entire adult life. If that sounds worth your time, please subscribe to my channel so the next episode finds you. I'm Dr. Nick Kecker, and I'll see you in episode 2 of the series.